Hello everyone and welcome to World Class, conversations with the industry's top photographers, cinematographers, and visual artists. Today on the show we have British photojournalist Emily Garthwaite. Emily has an ability to capture photos that reach out and grab you, where you can really feel the connection between her and her subjects. And we talk about just that today, as well as we talk about how street photography is the perfect training ground for photojournalism. Emily joins us today from her home in London. Emily, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you taking the time. I know it's a few hours later there in London, and so you've had a full day already, I'm sure.
Much harder for you.
Yes, well, it's mid-morning for me, so not so bad.
Okay, I lied.
I'm still a fresh spring chicken right now. One of the things that obviously I want to talk about is your incredible photojournalism and street photography. One of the things that really struck me about your work was how connected you were to your subjects and how there was such a realism, but also a hyper-realism in your photos. And so the first question always is, how did you get to this point? You're still quite young and you've done an incredible amount of work in this short time. So tell me about when you first discovered photography, your process of becoming a photographer, and how you got to where you are today.
I think photography was really ignited around age 15. And I'm staying with my family at the moment because we've rented out our house. We're supposed to be on an assignment at the moment, but it's been delayed. But there was a forest fire here when I was 15, and it was 3 miles long, and I had grown up playing in these woods, and suddenly the whole thing was alight. And I remember picking up my mum's camera and running out the house and photographing it. My dad was with me, and it was incredible because it's quite peaty soil. The ground was also burning, so you sort of had the smoke of the trees and things were still alight, but mostly it was this incredible kind of cloud of smoke on the floor. And so I ran back home and sent them to my local newspaper, and I still don't know why at that age. I think I might have been 14. I just wanted people to know that it had happened, and I was so upset about it. And then it was published in the newspaper, so that was the first time that I had taken a picture. And it's quite interesting that I subsequently went into sort of fashion stuff, but I think really it all started with that moment. So then after that, I went to Central St Martin's. I really wanted to be a painter or a sculptor or something messy, and I was taking pictures at clubs just to make a couple of 50 quid every now and again. And so I started assisting fashion photographers, some really old school ones, so Willie Christie and Patty Boyd, and then some younger fashion photographers who are now extremely successful. And I just sort of started to watch how they worked with people and started to look at the fashion world, and I just thought, this doesn't really chime with me in any way. And a friend of mine said, would you like to come to Morocco? Her family were based out there. And I started taking pictures on the street, and her father said, Moroccans never say yes. How did you get these portraits? And I said, I don't know. I just started chatting to them and felt really at ease with just approaching people and hearing their stories and having a laugh with them, exchanging stories as well. And then after that, I decided I'd go to India. So that was at age 20. So yeah, so over a period of about 5 years, it changed a lot. But I came full circle, which is sort of wonderful.
What I find really interesting with your work in a sense of in how it relates to the connection between you and your subject is, these aren't photos you're taking around London or around England or in Australia or North America. These are in countries where English is not necessarily a first language. I'm thinking like Romania and India, of course, and that type of thing if you're in Morocco. What has been, in terms of like how multilingual are you? What has been your strategy in conversing with people or meeting people that don't share a common language? How have you managed that?
That's actually a very, very good point. So I can speak bits and bobs, but that is nothing to be proud of. I mean, I will find out a few phrases, but I don't really think it is down to a language thing. Most people recognize a couple of words. So, for instance, in Hindi, it'd be like "bahut sundar," very beautiful. All you have to do is walk up to a woman in India with your camera and say, "You look so beautiful," and make a bit of a flurry and hope someone has something to say and get their picture. In Romania, no one actually knows this. I had a cardboard sign that I got a friend of mine in Romania to write out, which said, "Hello, I am a strange English woman. My name is Emily. I want to take pictures of you on the mudflats. Please say yes." And that was it. So I would rather enthusiastically run up to people and then it would be handed around and people would start laughing and I'd be going, "Please." And they'd say yes. And then in Romania, I'd come back the next day and they'd say, "This is the strange, crazy English woman." And they say, "You have to get her to take your picture. She took our picture yesterday." Because I had a friend who was he was sort of translating, but he was sitting in the car mostly. So that was sort of one way that I did it. In India, they speak a lot of English, Hinglish.
Yeah.
So a mix between the two. And I know enough Hindi to get by quite comfortably. But actually in London it's the hardest.
Really? How
Yeah.
so?
Well, I'd say London and Morocco, because in London we're not as in India they love pictures. They love photography. For every picture I took, I had a selfie afterwards, So as an exchange, they always want pictures with you.
Yeah.
So there's a nice deal. So, if they approach me for a selfie, I'll say, "Can I take your picture?" or whatever. Obviously that's quite a new thing in India, having selfies. But in London, people are just a bit suspicious. Why do you want to take my picture? Where's this picture going to go? What are you going to do with it? How do I get this picture? And sometimes that can sort of spoil the potential moment. So I tend to try and be as candid as possible and shoot from the hip, and not necessarily ask people for permission unless I want it to be a seated portrait. So just be out in the open and just try and pat people when they don't know.
Yeah.
So it's quite.
Yeah, and has there been a way to sort of diffuse people when people are coming to you with that sort of attitude, like, "What are you doing? Why do you want my photo?" Do you have a methodology for just saying, "Hey, I'm just doing this, and here's my website or something," or here's, what's your process there?
I mean, no one really says no. I think I can probably recall the times when people have said no.
Right.
It mostly happened when I first started, because I think if there was one bit of advice I could give anyone who's approaching strangers on the street, is that they smell your fear. And when you first start doing it, you do anticipate a no, because you're really nervous about it. And it is awkward when someone says, "No, please don't." And you go, "Okay." But now if someone says that to me, which is quite rare, I say, "Okay, well, have a great day." Yeah. One thing that I find really great is just having Instagram at hand. Mm-hmm. So they'll say, "No, I really," in the UK particularly, they'll go, no one wants to have my picture. They'll say I'm really unattractive, or people are quite honest. They say, why do you want to take a picture of me? And so I'll show them the people that I photographed, and I said, "I think that you're up there with these faces, you're an extraordinary looking person. I love what you're wearing, and I'd really love you to sit for this picture." And I think it is a collaboration, and it should feel like, think how many people we walk past a day, thousands probably, especially when you're out street shooting. And I think you have to make them realize that you maybe stop 2 people a day. Think of all those people that walk past. So you have to make them understand that you really have chosen them out of thousands of other people. And if you can sort of get that across and be light about it, don't be really intense, don't be demanding of them, then people are pretty much, they're honored to have their picture taken. A lot of elderly women love it. They go, "Oh gosh, no one's ever taken my picture," and they'll sort of already be.
Yeah.
So generally speaking, no one's ever rude, they're always lovely. And if they're nervous, it's just about making them feel comfortable.
And so when you decided to start traveling and incorporating the photography into your traveling, presumably you had to make some sort of arrangements in terms of, you had to figure out, okay, well, if I'm going to travel to India and I'm going to do a photography assignment, I want to plan some things out. Was it like that, or did you just really, was it like, "I'm just bringing my camera, let's see what happens," or was there a big planning process that had to happen?
Well, I think I mentioned the email when you asked me about this. Most of my planning was just around the fact that at the time I just turned 21, and being a young woman, traveling around on your own in India, you have to be pretty careful. So even simple things like the clothes that I bought, the way that I packed, keeping things really light. I basically bought a 50 millimeter lens and a Canon 5D Mark III. That was it. 2 batteries and charger. I didn't bring a big camera bag full of stuff. I brought like a box of SD cards. I just tried to keep it as light as possible because there wasn't going to be anyone there looking out for me during the day. And a lot of the stuff when you're just planning is you want to make sure that you're staying in the best place where your equipment's going to be okay. I did a lot of research on just things that were going on. For instance, I counted this video on Vimeo of these break dancers in Dharavi, which is the biggest slum in Asia, and it's in Mumbai, and it's an amazing place. And there's a lot of misconceptions of slums, and this doesn't. There's a lot of misconceptions about the place. For instance, they recycle nearly everything that's in there, and they produce a huge amount of money. I mean, in Mumbai, I think every year they make so much money, and it's a wonderful community of people. Everyone knows each other. But I found these break dancers called slum gods, and so I ended up spending all my time in Mumbai in Dharavi with them, and they were amazing. And they were doing workshops with young kids, but it was mainly just about representing. And they spoke to me a lot about the impact of Slumdog Millionaire and how much it affected people in the local community, because it gave other Indians permission to call them dogs. So it was a really, really interesting insight into life in Mumbai, especially in a place that people said was very dangerous. I didn't find it dangerous at all. I found it a really incredible place where it might have been at times quite poverty stricken, but a sense of community that I hadn't really experienced, because in the UK we just don't really have that. We don't speak to each other on the street or on the tube. We're silent, and your neighbours you don't know. So that was a lovely introduction to India. And after that, I just started to research as I went and just find out what was going on. But it was mainly about getting to know the people that I was living with and around, because most guest houses are next door to a family or chatting to people on the street. And if you're taking pictures of strangers and you strike up conversation, they say you should come for lunch or dinner, or I've got my friend's wedding, come to it. And so you just sort of follow that journey and hope that something sort of pops up, really. But it's different now. Now I would heavily plan, but back then I didn't have to worry so much. It was just the first time I started to explore fully what I wanted to do.
What is, if you had to sort of make 2 columns and say, in one column not having a plan, and in the second column having a plan, there must be sort of a feature and sort of downside to each one of those. What would you say would be in those boxes in terms of like not having a plan and having a plan?
Well, I think intentions. So, for instance, if you're just going out and doing street photography, you sort of can go out without a plan. You need to pick maybe where you're going to go. So if you're in Mumbai, you say you'll probably create a little route, but you might not even finish it. You might end up going down a different road, or you might end up staying in a train station shooting all day. But if you're doing a story, then you need to heavily research and connect with anyone you can about it, and make sure that it's as in-depth as possible. And those are the sort of 2 sides that I'm on. Is that some projects I spend a long time and I get obsessed about it, and will dig up anything I can and try and get to know as many people in the area or who are involved in a certain issue or situation. But with street photography, you don't really need to have that sort of plan, because it doesn't necessarily have to have sort of context. It doesn't have to have a caption, It's just capturing life on the street.
It's interesting you say that, because one of the things that I think about now too when it comes to street photography is, I'm sure that you're familiar with the Tumblr and now Facebook account and the Humans of New York. And with Humans of New York, you take something that you're just photographing basic everyday people, but they dig deep into stories. And so how how do you decide when, I know this might be a sort of a strange question, but how do you decide when street photography needs to be more about journalism and about spending time with that person once you meet them, and it's their story that makes the image interesting? And when is it a time where, well, you're just like a funny looking person, like you're just a really interesting looking person or really beautiful or whatever? Do you have do you kind of go with certain intents at different times, or I'm just going to go capture photos, or this time I'm going to go and find some stories?
Well, I guess it's Brandon, isn't it? Humans of New York. I don't know what his surname is, but I guess for him, the captions, if anything, the pictures just illustrate it. You know, so it brings, because sometimes he doesn't even show their face if it's a very, very sensitive topic. So in many ways, the picture is just a lovely illustration of the story. And it's quite interesting to see, you know, who it represents. You might see someone that you wouldn't ever believe was, say, you know, the most famous concert pianist in the world. You know, there's always a lovely kind of conversation that goes on between the image and the text. And he has a very clear signature, and that is his brand. You know, he has to keep up with all of that. In terms of going out shooting, I'm attracted to certain scenes, and I know that my fiance Alan, who's also a street photographer, is attracted to the same thing. So there must be, you don't necessarily go out with an intention, you just look for shadow, light, geometry, interesting people. Because we'll be walking down the street, maybe he'll be 3 meters ahead of me, I'll be 3 meters behind. We'll stop for a coffee, we'll go through our pictures, and we'll both have taken the same pictures of the same people or the same scenario. And we'll go of all the bloody, you know, but it's that we recognize that each moment, you know, we're in tune with what's going on in our surroundings. Yeah. And that's nothing to do with us having a similar style, because in many respects we don't. It's just we recognize that these are interesting moments. I think if you go out with an intention, you probably won't find it. I think when you're going out street shooting or on any job or assignment, or even just if you're going out, you just want to go on a little walk with your camera, you have to be in a good mood. If I'm distracted or worried or stressed or ill, I won't see any pictures. And I will walk around and just feel very, very confused about it all. But if I'm on good form and have a really, really clear mind, and in some ways an intention, which is just to get some great work, then I see pictures everywhere. It's like slow motion. It's like a game. It really is. It is like a game. And when you get a good shot, you get a little adrenaline kick, and then you carry on, you know, and it's addictive. It really is.
Yeah. I totally concur. It's funny just hearing you say that. You know, when you go out with you know, being in a great mood, you just capture so much more. I was on a recent trip this spring to Paris, and I was there for 3 weeks, and the best photos came from my first 2 days, because I was like, I love this place, you know?
It's the first 3 days, yeah. I think.
Yeah.
If you stay anywhere longer, I'm beginning to realize this, it's because, yeah, it's all new.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fresh eyes changes
absolutely. Everything. So talk to me about it's interesting to hear, you know, you talk about going out with Alan and shooting the same thing, but what is true is that obviously you come from 2 different lives. You didn't grow up together, and presumably have different influences. So can you isolate at all sort of what your influences are, and what inspires you, and what you took from sort of your just, you know, regular life, and bring that into your photography?
I love certain fashion photographers, Nick Knight, Norman Parkinson, who's very old school. Obviously, street photographers like Elliot Erwitt, and I think there's other Harley Weir, who's a current fashion photographer. I really love her work. Who else? I'm just trying to think of some other ones. I think it's a mixture of very stylized fashion portraiture, and then really old school street. And I usually get likened to people like Steve McCurry, but I wouldn't put him as a big influence, actually. I'd probably put more fashion photographers as my influence. And also portrait painters, the really old school paintings. I love going to the National Gallery in London and going and seeing, you know, the old masters. I think photography is very, very similar. Very similar. When you're putting a portrait together and you're waiting for that tiny little bit of light just to pop in that moment, I think it's the same. And the editing process is like painting. So yeah, fashion photographers and painters would be my biggest influences.
So I want to make sure that we took some time today to sort of our main case study, which is your your trip to India. So if you can tell us a little bit about what led you to take that trip, and then take us through some of the most iconic images for you and some of the stories surrounding those images and what it took to capture some of those. I'll let you take us through that journey.
Well, so I've been to India 3 times. First time I went with a very good friend of mine. Second time on my own, and third time with my fiance. And the first time was a very, very intense trip for me because it was the first time I'd really left home and seen something new. And so I went just before I left. My grandmother had vascular dementia, and she'd lost her proper memory, I think, around 4 years before. But you could sort of converse with her the last year of her life, but not very, very well at all. And so she was quite similar to me. Well, I was very similar to her. We also looked very, very similar. And she was a very successful concert pianist and very emotional, and very, very creative. And she'd grown up in Assam in northeast India on a tea plantation. I come from quite a kind of colonial family. And she'd left in her early 20s and came to London, where she became a fur model and a pianist. But the kind of ties to India still remained, and the farm was sold after that, and it was her happiest memories. And so when she died, my mum and I had an evening here at home, and we had shared quite a few glasses of wine, and cried and laughed. And I think anyone with family, when things like this happen, this is normally what you do. Is it's just sort of a way of you want to talk about it and celebrate it, and also have your moment to sort of think about it. And my mum sort of said, well, why don't you take Granny to India? And I went, of course. So I left with this bag of her ashes. I don't know if you've ever seen ashes, but it's very rubbly. It's like they're like small stones to begin with. And I remember I carried her with me on me at all times, because I was so careful about how I held the ashes. I was really sort of nervous about it. And then sort of as the months went past, she sort of soon found her way to the bottom of my bag. And I thought it was rather beautiful, because over those sort of 3-4 months, it just turned to dust, actually. It was just ground down in my bag. And I ended up scattering her ashes in the Ganges in Varanasi. And that was a extraordinary evening. I did it on my mother's and my grandfather's birthdays, so my grandmother's father. And I, at that point, was spending all my time with these wonderful guys who, they were kind of street boys. A lot of them had their mothers, but a lot of them were without parents, and they were incredibly immature and ranged from about the age of 8 until about probably 32. And frankly, they were all the same age. I mean, they were just boys, really. But they were amazing, and they helped me put together the whole ceremony. And they really wanted it to be a Hindu ceremony, but I said no, I'd like to do my own one, actually. And so we got candles. We got around 100 candles and rose petals, and it was an extraordinary evening for me. But that experience that I had and that they had gave me permission to have access in Varanasi that I doubt many other photographers would have had, because they respected the fact that I had travelled all that way to scatter a relative there, and that is and then also to have them there for that experience. So a lot of people have asked me how I got certain access. Well, that's how, and I wouldn't advise everyone doing it, but it was a very particular personal experience. I always felt very connected to India, and going there and doing that just made me feel even closer to it. And And so that's why I then returned with my fiance, because it's a very important place for me.
So take me through some of the most memorable images for you from that. I know that one of them had garnered some attention, the elephant that was used in the ceremony for Diwali. That garnered you quite a bit of attention. So that one stands out obviously for me, but there's many others that are really, really striking. And I want to know from you which ones were the most memorable and important for you during those trips and the photos that you've taken.
So the first ever photograph that I went sort of struck a chord with me. I went, okay, that's good. That's a really good photograph. And it was pretty much one of my first kind of professional pictures. It was the first one really I put in my portfolio, and it's in Varanasi, and it's of a guy, and he's cloaked, and it's all lit by street lamps. And I remember I was on this tiny little boat with the boys in Varanasi, and none of us saw the person's face. It was just this faceless, cloaked spirit. It's become that for us. I normally call the picture ghost. And I remember taking the picture and going, that's something really special. And it wasn't just because it's a great picture, it's because it was so uncommon to see there. I wasn't just in awe of what was happening in front of us, so was everyone else who lives there. So I sort of knew that I'd caught something unusual, something different. India is a cliche, and it's very hard to find something that doesn't look typically Indian. But I felt that was sort of unusual, and that was shared by everyone around me. I guess some of my kind of most liked pictures are not necessarily the ones that I love the most. There are pictures that I post, and they're my favourite pictures, but people couldn't care less. Mm-hmm. That it's sort of, and I'll constantly put them out because I'll go, but I love this one. So I think some of that is a lot to do with the experience I had in making the picture. One of my favourites is the 4 boys in the water in Mumbai. Mm-hmm. That one I share with other people, and that was wonderful because I was so hyperactive around that time in my life. Mm-hmm. Honestly, I was in an absolute frenzy. And I went down to Dhobi Ghat, which I went with a friend who lives in Mumbai, and he kind of snuck me in because there's a sort of mafia scam there, which they tell you there's an entrance fee, and I think it's like $20 or something crazy. So he sort of snuck me around the back, and we started to walk around there. And he had a friend that lived in one of the houses, and so I got to meet those boys just because it was it was a couple that I knew. It was their children, and this is it's a washing vat, and I mean, getting one child to sit still is hard enough, but having 4 boys, knowing they're going to have their picture taken, all this attention was, I stand by it. It was very impressive. Yeah. I barely made any eye contact with them once I said I was going to take this picture of them in the water. The first bit they did was sort of run into the vats, and there's water going everywhere, and I'm sort of trying to say, calm down, can you lower down? And I sort of found that rather than having them stand in the water, I found that if their mouth was under the water, they wouldn't speak. So I had them here because it meant that they wouldn't be talking to each other and giggling. I mean, you can sort of see in the picture, I think I took 4 pictures of them in that set. I mean, the other ones, one of them's coming up to tease the other or knock the other one. But I was really, really proud of that picture because I thought it was just a really great experience and sort of transformed the place, and it represents what Dhobi Ghat's about. And that's really what the place kind of feels like. So that's one picture that I've always been very, very, very fond of. Other pictures, the kind of most recent one, which was in India, was in also Mumbai. I think some of my best works come from Mumbai. I love the city. I just am obsessed with the city. That and Kolkata, I just think they are incredible, vibrant, street photography central cities. But there was one picture, and we were on a ferry boat going to this island, and there was this lovely family, three daughters. They'd grown up in the UK, And then they'd moved to India, and all three of the daughters were having none of it. They wanted to all go back to the UK, which I thought was so unusual, because I'd be going, this is amazing to move to India. But they really missed it. And they were on this ferry boat throwing crisps at these seagulls. And it was a total fight for crisps, and the parents were giving each one of them a packet of crisps, and the middle child, who was in the middle, was just, I mean, you could see she was looking at her sisters saying, I want to get another packet. I want to feed them as much as possible. And I just got this really great candid shot of the mother telling her off, which happened many, many times. And I thought it really represented exactly how I felt with the breeze. It was, it was blowing around. There were seagulls everywhere. I think Alan was asleep at this point, conked out on the side of the boat. And I was really pleased with that. I said, that's the sort of work that I want to continue to produce. That's what I would like to keep going.
And you also have some more sensitive photos in there. You spent, I don't know if you spent any time, but you have a few photos of brothel workers, of sex trade workers. How did those come about, and how did you deal with those more sensitive situations?
So in Bihar, there's an NGO called Nari Gunjan, which means Women's Voice, and it's a female empowerment charity. It's fantastic, very grassroots, and at this point, it's almost now run by the women who had first started, the girls. So they've been going now for, gosh, how long? 50 years, I think. And Sudha, who runs it, she was a Catholic nun in Kerala, and she heard about the untouchables as they were known then, and she decided to leave her nunnery and went to Bihar, and then cycled a marathon a day from the place that she managed to stay in to reach these women. And she did that for years and years and years, decades. And she's extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. And she sort of, those women go into battle with her in a way. There were many moments where women had been victims of sexual violence, to the point that one woman, whilst I was there, had actually been killed. And all these women will march with her to the police station and will stand together, united because of the support that Sudha's offered them, the confidence that she's given them, and also the legal advice and the legal support that Nari Gunjan can offer. But most importantly, it's got a safe house called Pranana Hostel, and it's got around 150 girls there, ranging from, there's maybe 7-year-old girls up to around 16, 18 bracket. And it's wonderful. And they teach them karate. There's female empowerment songs. There's very, very strict schedules, and it's pretty intense studying. But all the girls are absolutely on it. And it's an incredible atmosphere to be around. And actually just see how it is a movement more than anything. And I think that's what so many charities should be. It's something that is sort of picked up by the community, and they will just carry it on. So that was why I had all those photographs. There's also a particular luxury, should I say, to being a female photographer. You can approach children and you can approach women, and for some reason they find you less threatening than if you're a man. I know that's particularly frustrating sometimes for male photographers that I know, who are incredibly sensitive and very respectful and don't want to make anyone feel uncomfortable. But I've definitely found that, the relationship that I have with children and women is something that I'm instantly drawn to. I find that so many of my pictures are of children and women. I don't mean to do it. I can't help it. It's just what I seem to, be drawn to. But photographing those women, I found wonderful. I try to keep a sense of humour and fun, and we had very brief conversation, but it was special. There's a wonderful. I know that many of my kind of girlfriends know it. There's a wonderful feeling of when all women are together in one space, even if it's just a room. There's a sort of collective comfort to it, being surrounded by other women, as I'm sure in some ways there is when men are all together. Mm-hmm. And I found that to be a really wonderful experience, because I could sort of offer my support to those girls, discuss all sorts of things, whether it was sexual health or what it was like to be in my country. They're all saying, "You married? You know, have you got a boyfriend?" You know, it was really lovely because I was that much, you know, I was only 21. There's a lot that I could talk about with these girls. They were around the same age as me. Some were a lot younger, but that also helped a lot, I think, the relationship I had with those women.
And we often think of photojournalism as sort of, you know, you take a couple photos for a newspaper article or for a magazine, that type of thing. But so much of photojournalism is about social causes, and I know that seems to have been impactful for you, and I want to know sort of what role does traditional journalism play, and what role does social causes play in your work?
I think I was speaking to someone about storytelling. You know, it's the first thing that we ever did when we were cavemen. You know, it's something that humans have always done. Storytelling is universal. That's a wonderful thing about photographs. Is whilst not everyone can speak the same language, a photograph can say so much. I don't think it says 1,000 words, but I think it can have a shared message, which is really wonderful. I think photojournalism is such an incredible field to be in, and I feel lucky every single day. I think traditional photojournalism, in my eyes, is exactly what it should be. I know that journalism has changed a lot now. Now that everything's online, we don't give as much time to photographs or words. Everything's so instant. And I sort of long for the days when you would have to sit down and really look through a body of work. It's pretty frustrating as well, having things like Instagram where, that sort of, there's my work. You know, there's a real process to it, or maybe a way that you want it to be curated, or there's a lot of time behind it, and it can feel very instant. You know, someone gives it a like, someone doesn't, someone says something about the picture, someone says something rude, or that's something which is just it's just how it is now, and I'm very, very happy that it does, because I mean, one, it means that people who would never have seen my work will now. For instance, you know, we have SPI and myself, we have a big audience in Indonesia. You know, that just wouldn't have been possible, you know, when photojournalism was how it was back in the day. But I still think it holds exactly the same values, and I think that there are still people that invest in long-term stories and projects. But yeah, there are so many genres now. I was speaking to someone about that. You know, there's documentary photography, and there's photojournalism, and there's fine art, and there's food photography, and there's fashion photography, and there's still life, and you can go on and on and on and on. And then someone says, "What sort of photography do you do?" And I always find it very unusual that you sort of have to specify which club you're in. I'd always like to just see myself as a photographer, because I might want to get into fashion, and I could do fashion and fine art or photojournalism. You know, there shouldn't be those boundaries. And one of the great things about street and photojournalism is I think they do run exactly the same course. You're still interacting with people. I see street photography as training for photojournalism. So you train your eye, you practice approaching people, you get familiar with the speed. I use a rangefinder. I've got a Leica M240. So just practicing with a rangefinder, just making sure that you're on it, that you know exactly at what angle on the aperture ring that you need to get to f5.6, or it's kind of the training field, and that's what London sort of become as well. And then once I feel that I'm sort of all tuned in and my eye is where it needs to be, then I feel very, very ready for an assignment, because I've done all of that training. I do see it as training. It's like if you stopped, when you stop cooking, or you stop, you know, if you play tennis, if you stop playing tennis, I think it's exactly the same. And I don't like to be stagnant and then just go on a job without having tuned in.
You know, harkening back to sort of Henri Cartier-Bresson and his, you know, basically taking that Leica camera onto the street and creating what is effectively street photography, especially with a rangefinder camera. Has your choice to, because I know that we've talked about you using the 5D Mark III, and then now you have the Leica. What changed for you in terms of the process going from a DSLR to a rangefinder camera?
It was huge. It was like using the Leica for the first time. I was a kid in a candy shop. I remember just sending just sending pictures from the camera screen to a friend and just going, oh my God, because it just had such incredible tonality. It had colors that I hadn't even expected to have been in, it would be as simple as there being a green cup on the table and that tiny bit of green just slightly hitting, the right cheek. And when I was editing, it would come up and I go, that's extraordinary. You don't see that with the human eye. But because it's a rangefinder, it means that you can miss pictures. And that is frustrating. But it's incredibly discreet. No one's threatened by it, which is something really, really important, I think, in street photography and photojournalism. When you've got a very, very big, bulky camera, and it's making big old shots, and you can see the lens focus. I think it's not as comfortable for the person on the other side of the lens. But with a Leica, people sometimes think it's just a film camera, and other people they think it's really, really beautiful. They want to talk about it, or you can show them how to use it. They're just much more interested in that camera than they were a Canon camera. Secondly, it was amazing to transition from Canon to Leica because Canon is much bulkier. I don't like to carry around loads and loads of gear. So I had a 24 and 50 and then the camera body, which takes up more room than 4 lenses and a Leica body. And I can have that in a tiny little satchel, whilst my Canon gear I'd have to have in a big rucksack. And it was just so much more bulky. But then Leica is very fragile. If it rains, it needs almost a mini umbrella for it. I mean, even a couple of drops of rain, if you drop it, you're in trouble. There are a lot of, it's the most delicate, irritating, wonderful camera. But you have to treat it with a lot of respect. I love having a rangefinder because it gives you an extra second to think about how you're composing. And it's got a great live view screen where you can see your photograph before you've taken it. And I find sometimes when you're just looking through a viewfinder, you can't pull back in the same way. I love actually being able to take a picture from here and just compose it. It's only a couple of
So you're endorsing the mum shot. You're endorsing taking photographs
yeah, absolutely. If you're doing a portrait, that's great. I think it's fantastic. I haven't missed Canon. Editing wise, the files are totally different. That was something I had to practice a lot. I literally took one picture and on the Leica, just a Leica file, and I edited it. And each time Al said, "You've edited it, and it looks like a Canon file." And I was going, "That's so weird. I've just made it look like a Canon picture." So it was a completely different approach to editing. You've just got so much more dynamic range. And there's just so much more you can push the files. I've always loved having very, very rich, colourful photographs. I don't intentionally do it. I just really enjoy pushing the picture as much as I'd like to. And so for that, Leica is a kind of artist camera, and I feel like that is the perfect tool for what I want to achieve.
Before we kind of wrap things up, one of the things that I think is unique for you in terms of a lot of the photographers that we've spoken to, that I've spoken to, is that you have been quite entrenched in the academia of photography. You've seen that all the way through into graduate degrees and things like that. So how important was the role of coming from an academic point of view? How much did that play into your photography, and how much of that didn't affect your photography?
So So I did a foundation, which is very much a kind of you sort of try everything out, and it's 8 months. It's not particularly serious. I guess it's sort of a gateway to a degree. I didn't do a degree. I didn't do an undergraduate. I decided that I would assist photographers instead. I was very stubborn, still am, and I said that I wanted to learn through photographers rather than learn it the academic way. And then I went and did a master's, and I sort of went in with the clear intention, and I spoke to the course leader. I said, I want to learn about the business of photography. I want to learn how to protect myself, write contracts, keep this as sustainable as possible. I went in not so much from a creative stance, or even the way I wanted to develop. It was much more about how can I keep myself safe, because I think that's one thing that photographers aren't really taught is, your contracts, your image licensing. You hear too many horror stories about people's pictures ending up on billboards and their raw files going missing, or all these sorts of things. But my experience on that course was that unfortunately that was not provided, and that for me, I think assisting photographers was the most successful experience for me, watching how people work and just being hands-on in that way. Academia is fantastic in many ways, but it can be incredibly pedantic. I'm a doer. I'm not as good talking about it. I prefer for someone else to talk about my work and for me to make it, and I don't like to analyze other people's pictures so much. I genuinely don't believe that someone put that intense amount of thought that you write an essay about it, because a lot of stuff when you're just on the job, some of your best work is you're completely in the zone and you get it. So there was quite a lot of talking, and I think you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And it's always interesting because I know that I talk to a lot of cinematographers as well, and being one, we're in this world where film school, for example, is where you get all your contacts, and it's well known that you don't learn how to make a film in film school. You just make films with people who will become your colleagues in years to come, and you create those communities. But not really understanding the role of photography school. Obviously you have to understand the history of photography and all this sort of stuff, but it's really curious to hear in terms of like how big of a role that plays once you leave school. Does it create that groundwork for you, or is there a community it builds for you? Those types of things, that's.
I think I went onto that course as one type of photographer, and what was really, really great is all these other doors were sort of opened, and they started looking at documentary photography and all the different ways to tell a story. And those were invaluable. It was great. Just to put yourself out of your comfort zone, and find out what your comfort zone is. Right. I didn't realize, what things I was really comfortable in. But then I sort of came full circle. I came back to what I loved. And that is your signature and your identity and who you are as a photographer. I think if I tried to be anything else, it would just be incredibly tiring. So I try to do the best as me, really. Yeah. But my course mates ended up being my tutors as well. That was one fantastic thing about, I didn't really know any photographers before then. So I was on suddenly a course with people that shared all the same interests, and I think that's it. The student base is everyone sharing work and critiquing it and discussing how they got to that point, and just sharing these experiences and how people tell stories. So that's one amazing reason that I really did enjoy my master's.
So tell me what's coming next for you in terms of future projects and some of the things that you're hoping to do in this coming year.
So we're doing a lot as Street Photography International. So at the moment we're just starting our first workshops, and Alan and I will be doing separate workshops in the UK and around the world, which will be fantastic. And that's something that we really, really want to invest in, because we built up a certain following that have asked for these sorts of things. So I really want to spend some time going and meeting people, traveling and sharing our experiences of street photography. And then in terms of work, there's lots of stuff on the horizon, but what ends up happening is it's just a lot of emailing first and paperwork and making sure everything's set in stone. We were supposed to be on an assignment now for 2 months in Africa for a book, but that's now been delayed until January and March. So being freelance has more pitfalls than positives in many respects. So that's what we're waiting for now. I've just been in Sumatra doing a story with SOCP, which is an orangutan conservation trust, and working with the team who were a documentary team behind Blackfish. So I'm working with one of the guys that guided them around Sumatra, called Shane. He's fantastic. And looking at the impact of palm oil and deforestation in Sumatra, in particular the middle tier, which is the mafia-run organizations that are thinning out the jungle. So it's not like smallholders chopping down their area of land, or the huge corporations who pay off people and get the land. It's actually about this middle tier, which isn't really spoken about. That's a long-term project, and that requires a bit more money to actually pump into it to get all the access we need, because it's very hard to get around Sumatra. The Losa ecosystem, which is the jungle that's been protected, 4/5 of it have now gone. But the roads to get there, which shouldn't really be there anyway, because it breaks up breeding colonies, or it breaks up everything that's living there. They're also always kind of washed out because of landslides from deforestation. So it's quite hard to get places. So at the moment it's just raising money to tell the rest of the story. But I've been in Katambe photographing some of the towns and villages that have been affected by landslides and flash floods, and how they're just trying to get the government to assist them in rebuilding their homes, and stopping the mafia from continuing to remove their land, because they're powerless to stop people like that. So that's been a very important story for me. My father was a zoologist, still a conservationist, and he looked after orangutans and gorillas for the first, until he was 27. And Ian, who runs it, took over my dad's job. So it's got a really, really wonderful family connection. Conservation and wildlife photography is something that I absolutely love. I mean, I'm not a wildlife photographer, but that is a kind of insatiable passion of mine. I'm realizing it more and more and more. Those are the stories that I really, really want to tell, but it's not sustainable to work like that. I have to keep a balance. So there is a compromise, but I want to pump everything I can into those sorts of stories, and the teams that you work with on those pieces are just extraordinary. It's such a privilege not only to spend time with orangutans, either in quarantine centers or in the wild, but with the people that are looking after them. From just the guys in the office, the scientists, to the guides and the people in the field team, the drivers, the local villages you stay in, some of the pretty dubious jungle huts we had to sleep in. It's a wonderful experience, and you get to know country, and you get angry at times because of what you hear, but you celebrate other moments. And being a journalist and returning to places, you normally come back for really landmark moments. If legislation's gone through to stop something, or I know Al and our experiences in the Calais jungle were extraordinary, because there were times when things were really positive. There were times when you were united by a sense of anger in some respects, frustration, hope, and that's why I love photojournalism, for those reasons.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Emily, for taking the time. What a great discussion, and I'm really excited for everyone to see this discussion and to see what you do, you and Alan do with Street Photography International as well. I encourage everyone to go and check out your website and to check out the Street Photography International's Instagram page and website. A ton of great stuff on there. And please bring it to Canada. We'd love to see you here.
Oh no, I'd love to. I'd love to. Hopefully we will.
Thanks so much, Emily. Take care.